Um, Thanks again for tuning in to the Ornithology Listeners Backyard Wildlife Series. I think this is episode 8, All Coyote on the Western Front. I really had a lot of fun putting this one together. I hope you enjoy it, and maybe we can all teach each other a thing or two. Before we get started, my weekly reminder to check out the UEC In My Backyard website, full of great material for the curious of all ages. I just realized that educator Miguel Santos, pictured here, has produced videos on this site now in 3 different languages. So we are now trilingual. We got English, Spanish, and French videos. He is one of the best educators around. He's an award-winning educator who put together some fantastic videos of him exploring nature with his kids. I just watched a short video, the one in French, of him recycling grocery store vegetables by, of course, replanting some of the living parts. But he is something else, and his videos are absolutely a joy to watch. And my opener this week is entirely different from last week, and I will say way more meaningful. So let's take a listen. I'm going to put a video on here, so you may need to adjust your volume a little bit. There is nothing to hear yet, so don't put your volume up too much yet.
My name is Lawrence Arepa. A long time ago, the Indian people didn't have any way to teach the children besides by doing what by following what the parents do in order to learn. So they didn't have books, they didn't have any written language, so they used the coyote to teach the children. And the stories about the coyote always has a moral to it. And it teaches them what is right, what is wrong, or it tells about how something happened, how something came to be that we see now. A lot of the stories that I tell in English kind of loses some of the meaning because of the Indian language being so more colorful in their explanations or in the telling of a story. I go to the tribal school or talk to the tribal kids or people, and I say Peepoishin, for instance, and Peepoishin means the car. That's the name that they gave to the car. But the word itself, Peepoi, is wrinkled, and shin pertains to the feet. So Peepoishin actually means wrinkled feet. And how did they get that? It's because the first thing they noticed on the automobile was the tires and the threads on the tire. So that's why they call it Peepoishin. I talk a lot about the river and the water. And I think a lot of the stories that we tell is always about the rivers or the lakes. And it's very important to us, and to keep the water clean and to protect it in every way we could. I believe that is one of the reasons why when we tell a coyote story, he's always running up and down the river or near the river. But we always tell about the rivers because they are always dear to us.
There are a couple of great stories that follow this intro in the video about the coyote, and I'll be sure to send you guys the link so you can watch Lawrence tell them later. He's great. But the coyote, in particular the personified godlike deity, Old Man Coyote, is the oldest preserved human story from the North American continent, as it was likely told first about 10,000 years ago. The Old Man Coyote figure crosses all of the regions of Native American kingdoms throughout time. beginning with um, the Clovis people, which were the first Americans that worked their way south after crossing the Beringia land bridge that connected Siberia with Alaska around 16,000 years ago. A quick aside, for those of you who know a little bit about Wisconsin, if you look closely on this map, you may notice a pretty cool detail. There's a little hole in the ice just west of Milwaukee, which we know of today as the driftless area of southwest Wisconsin. So I love this visual representation as an explanation of why it's called the driftless area, because it's a little pocket where the most recent glaciation event, the Wisconsin glaciation, missed out and scouring the countryside here. So if you visit it today, you see a very different landscape than the surrounding areas.
Can I say something real quick? Jeff, I think your video is still on. If you're able to turn that off so that Tim shows up next to the PowerPoint, that would be great.
Oh, I'd rather see Jeff than me.
Wouldn't we all?
All right. And here's
that
another.
better?
Got it?
I'm still seeing it. There you go. Perfect.
So for all of you Mapophiles out there, I love this visualization of the evolution spread of the human species out of Africa a couple 100,000 years ago. The numbers on this map represent how many thousands of years ago humans spread to the various parts of the globe. So the higher the number, the longer humans have been in an area. And I stared at this graphic for a long time, and I could spend more time looking at it. It's so cool to see things like that it took 198,000 years for humans to make it from their strongholds in Eastern Africa just over to the island of Madagascar, which is so much closer than just about everywhere else. Yet it was one of the last areas colonized by humans. Or how we made it to Australia about 50,000 years before we made it to New Zealand. Or when I think of Iceland, I think of ancient history with the Norse explorers and the gods, but relative to the rest of the world's human history, Iceland is just a newborn baby. And any map that doesn't show the colonization of North America via Europe about 500 or 600 years ago is also good. So, all right, so Old Man Coyote, again, is found in the stories of just about every North American indigenous culture, including the Aztecs. Old Man Coyote is, for many, the creator of the world. He's a survivor. Somebody said at the beginning, he's a trickster. He's almost always a he. He's extremely intelligent, and he's venerated. He's respected. He's a teacher of human frailties, and he's associated with the human spirit. This is important to remember because, as you may imagine, the story changes pretty dramatically. I'm going to forego the normal weekly journey through the tree of life this week, but know that coyotes are animals with backbones, and they're mammals. They're in the carnivore order, who specialize in eating other animals, even though there are herbivores and omnivores included in the carnivore family, like the plant-eating giant panda. But carnivores are further broken down into the felids, or the cat-like carnivores, and the canids, or the dog-like carnivores, marking the beginning of the thousands-of-year-old hatred between cats and dogs. Canids, by the way, also include bears and seals. And pop quiz, any guesses as to where we put this one, the hyena? Where does it belong? If it's a confusing question, because it is. The hyenas used to be a canid, and that's what I was talking to my kids about recently, but they were recently drafted by the felid team after support from further genetic analysis. So if you were taught that the hyena was a dog, it's actually a cat. The ancestral canid was located in the United States. And so this is the cradle for evolution of all wild dogs, is the United States. And from the original wild dog, the familiar gray wolf line dispersed to Asia and Europe, where it did some more evolving, made its way into legends like Grimm's fairy tales as the big and bad version of itself, and then returned to North America using the same land bridge. Other lines made their way into Africa and became jackals. And Then dingoes made their way to Australia, where there were lots of yummy babies to eat. So, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, and I admittedly have not seen the show, the dire wolf was real. It lived in North and South America. It was the largest wild dog ever, about twice as big as a full-grown German Shepherd. And packs hunted the mighty mastodons, but they went extinct shortly after early humans arrived. But it is a real thing. And then we have our coyote, Canis latrans, the canid that has never left North America. Okay, so starting with the most important item, how do you pronounce it? One of the earliest representations has an Aztec origin, which I understand is pronounced coyote. The L is actually an A sound. But the Spanish adopted it in 1651 and turned it into coyote, which is the earliest written representation and description of the species. And from Francisco Hernandez de Toledo, he wrote the first description, and he wrote, concerning the coyote or Indian fox, he went on to philosophize, its bite is harmful. Today, there is an interesting dichotomy in the English language, particularly in North America. How you say this animal's name is a fairly good indicator of both your political leanings and your rural-urban upbringing. So if you pronounce it coyote with a soft T sounding like a D and an accent on the second syllable, chances are higher that you're progressive in your political leanings and that you grew up in an urban environment. If you pronounce the word coyote, dropping the final syllable and putting an accent at the beginning of the word, chances are higher that you're more conservative in your political leanings and you grew up in a rural environment. So if you're confused in your current political leaning, maybe the question I asked you at the beginning of class today will help you figure it out. But to the third major wave of human immigration to the US, the early settlers from Northern Europe, as opposed to the Spanish immigrants from the South, they pronounced it slightly differently yet. They pronounced it prairie wolf, seen here in a very flattering depiction. This was the name given to the species by Lewis and Clark in 1804. And they didn't come across the coyote until they reached South Dakota, because at the time, as the title of the talk suggests, coyotes were all on the western front, native to the deserts and plains of the West. You wouldn't find them really east of the Mississippi River. And for the decades to follow, the European trained disciples of Mr. Alexander von Humboldt, like Thomas Say of Say's Phoebe fame, and Thomas Nuttall of Nuttall's woodpecker fame, and John Townsend of Townsend's solitaire fame, all took a break from their desire to name every living thing after themselves so that they could argue about what a coyote really was. Was it a fox? Was it a wolf? The strongest argument was that it was actually a jackal. But eventually, science determined that even though the coyote's closest genetic relative is the golden jackal, pictured here of Africa, a coyote was a coyote, deserving of being its own species, in a very rare sign of respect for this animal from our species. And it was Thomas Say who had the honor of bestowing that coyote with its Latin binomial name, Canis latrans Say. Of course, he needed to get his name in there, but it's essentially translated as Say's barking canine. But even well into the 40s, many were still referring to the coyote as the prairie wolf. In the 1851 novel, Moby Dick, Melville pens the line, "But those wild eyes met his as the bloodshot eyes of the prairie wolves meet the eye of their leader ere he rushes on at their head in the trail of the bison." Unfortunately for the coyote, this was one of the very few neutral to positive portrayals of the coyote. In the 1870s, as ranchers and farmers spread west, coyotes were beginning to be seen as competitors and threats to livestock, and its representation in literature starts to take a big turn south. And the biggest culprit, you probably know him, is Mark Twain. So we'll just take a listen to a reading from his 1872 bestseller, Roughing It.
Along about an hour after breakfast, we saw the first prairie dog villages, the first antelope, and the first wolf. If I remember rightly, this latter was the regular coyote of the farther deserts. And if it was, he was not a pretty creature or respectable either. For I got well acquainted with his race afterwards and can speak with confidence. The coyote is a long, slim, sick and sorry-looking skeleton with a gray wolf skin stretched over it, a tolerably bushy tail that forever sags down with a despairing expression of forsakenness and misery, a furtive and evil eye, and a long, sharp face with a slightly lifted lip and exposed teeth. He has a general slinking expression all over. A coyote is a living, breathing allegory of want. He is always hungry. He is always poor, out of luck, and friendless. The meanest creatures despise him, and even the fleas would desert him for a velocipede. He is so spiritless and cowardly that even while his exposed teeth are pretending a threat, the rest of his face is apologizing for it. And he is so homely, so scrawny and ribby and coarse-haired and pitiful. When he sees you, he lifts his lip and lets a flash of his teeth out, and then turns a little off the course he was pursuing, depresses his head a bit, and strikes a long, soft-footed trot through the sagebrush, glancing over his shoulder.
So, how could you not love the coyote after a glowing description like that? And believe it or not, from there on out, it just got worse. Horace Greeley described the coyote as a sneaking, cowardly little wretch. Ernest Ingersoll said they were cowardly to the last degree. And a 1920 Scientific American article described them as not worth the price of ammunition to shoot them, and then hurled maybe the biggest insult ever, calling the coyote the original Bolshevik. So, over the next 100 years, the story it just gets uglier. It starts with bounties on coyote scalps, moves to trapping for furs, and then soon thereafter, a unit of government called the Section of Economic Ornithology morphs into the U.S. Biological Survey, growing out of the exploits of those original naturalist surveyors like Lewis and Clark. And this department was struggling to remain relevant for many years with a limited budget. But as fate would soon have it, they became the beneficiaries of a great deal of support from the ranching and farming lobbies, who essentially wanted as much wildlife off their lands as possible, especially predators like bears, mountain lions, wolves, and coyotes. So pretty soon the federal government, backed by the ranchers, wages an all-out war on these predators. They even built an eradication methods laboratory to study the most efficient way to kill predators in particular. And they ended up distributing over 3 million bait stations of carcasses laced with strychnine, which was extremely efficient at killing all predators with minimal effort. And for the animal who ingests it, unfortunately, it's just a horribly violent way to die. Even scientists from the National Park Service were eager to join in this effort of ridding places like Glacier and Yellowstone of wolves, coyotes, and other predators. They even hired veterinarians, and sometimes veterinarians were required to release mange into wild coyote and wolf populations, and we're still feeling that effect today. It's still present today from that original introduction. And then soon after that, with the predators in decline, another opportunity arose that could support the Bureau even further, which is human hunters, who argued that now human hunters were necessary to control the prey populations that were dramatically increasing with all the predators out of the way. So it's one of the many dark chapters of American history. But even people in groups who we tend to hold in high regard, like Gifford Pinchot and the National Audubon Society, they supported this mass extermination of predators. Aldo Leopold famously wrote, "In those days, we had never heard of passing up a chance to kill a wolf." He went on, "I thought that because fewer wolves meant more deer, that no more wolves would mean a hunter's paradise." But he went on to show a rare early glimpse of compassion after seeing the fierce green fire in the wolf's eyes die out after he had shot it. He wrote, "I sensed that neither the wolf nor the mountain agreed with such a view." In just a 9-year period between 1947 and 1956, about 6.5 million coyotes were killed in the US, in what became, according to author Dan Flores, the most epic campaign of persecution against any animal in North American history. One of the results of this campaign was the complete extirpation of wolves from the lower 48 states. Wolves were just gone. But coyotes stuck around. And lest you think the war on coyotes is over, here's a quick reminder from just a few years ago. And the thing is, coyotes didn't just survive the onslaught. They actually ended up expanding their range through this entire time period. And they continue to expand the range today. In 2010, just 10 years ago, coyotes entered Delaware for the first time, marking the milestone of now being found in every state of the Union except Hawaii. They've expanded north all the way to the northern tip of Alaska, made it as far south as the Panama Canal. And the real question is, why was the government able to wipe out wolves and other predators pretty quickly, and bison? And why did they get so frustrated and fail so miserably in their efforts to wipe out this lowly coyote? It's like Hydra, you chop off one head and two grow in its place. There are likely a few factors at play here. First, the wolves are extremely good at filling the wolf niche in the world. They're specialists. They're excellent and efficient hunters, and their extreme sociality allows them to flourish as a pack. But if you're being targeted by the government, pack dynamics work against you. If you can get one wolf, you can lure in the rest of the pack for a quick slaughter. Coyotes, on the other hand, are extreme generalists and are amazingly adaptable. They're not like wolves, they're not excellent at filling the coyote niche, but they're very good at exploiting and adapting to several available niches. For example, wolves are strict carnivores with teeth adapted to tearing and shearing flesh. Coyotes are omnivores, and some of their back teeth are a little more rounded, which is helpful when eating plant matter. So where wolves are excellent at eating meat, coyotes are pretty good at eating both meat and plants. Second, coyotes can actually adapt the number of young they have to the current environment. When conditions are right for expansion, because numbers are suppressed, they can have huge litters of up to 16 pups, which is, so if you're being killed off by the government, you're cranking them out. But if the habitat is saturated and coyotes are kind of already at their maximum carrying capacity in an area, they'll reduce that litter size to as low as 2. In fact, one of the primary goals of the iconic coyote Howl is for them to gauge the size of the surrounding population and then adjust accordingly. So if it notices numbers decreasing overall, it'll produce a larger litter the next time around. Finally, and maybe most importantly, coyotes exhibit what's called fission fusion social dynamics, meaning they can be highly social when conditions favor it, and they can also switch to being solitary when conditions favor that. Like if you're being incessantly harassed by a federal government that is trying to abolish your species from the planet, it's time to abandon the pack strategy for a while. Wolves, on the other hand, fare much worse when their pack is gone. When coyotes are in packs, they can work together to take down larger prey like deer. When solitary, they'll switch to eating small rodents and even large insects. Where wolves are often dominant and bold, coyotes exhibit a nervousness to new introductions to their environment, so making them more wary in certain conditions, which has quite a few advantages from a survivalist standpoint, because new introductions into an environment can be harmful. If you add to these traits their above average intelligence, their lengthy childhoods where both parents are actually passing on cultural wisdom to their offspring, their incredibly acute senses of hearing, sight, and smell, all of this adds up to the coyote being a survivor. And when you look at all these traits together, it's much easier to see why Old Man Coyote was so relatable to early American humans in particular. One of the only other species in the world that exhibits this degree of fission fusion social dynamics is us. We also have lengthy childhoods with parents passing on wisdom. We're mostly omnivorous. We're very good at expanding into new territories, and we're also survivors, so far anyway. The thing about the mass persecution of coyotes is that at the time they were being mercilessly killed under the assumption that they were killing all this livestock. But the truth is nobody really knew what they ate because nobody had really studied them at the time. And as early as the 1920s, scientists from the American Society of Mammalogists started speaking out against these predator killing campaigns, which was a bit confusing to the researchers within the government who were promoting it. But scientists soon discovered that the bulk of the coyote's diet consisted of things like small rodents and rabbits, fruits and vegetables, and scavenging on carrion. And they have almost no impact on livestock, and particularly in large game animals. But even with this knowledge, the government doubled down, continued to strengthen the eradication campaign. And by the 1960s, the coyote was, at that point, they pretty much had nowhere to go but up. And luckily for the coyote, a big player was about to start swaying public opinion. Enter a company called Walt Disney. They produced about a half dozen coyote-friendly live action and animated films during the 1960s, including these epic films as like A Country Coyote Goes to Hollywood and Nashville Coyote, Coyote Tales, and they introduced a character, a coyote called Bent Tail. And you can probably guess what else was produced at the same time from another studio called Warner Brothers. And we can't not at least watch a few seconds of the most famous coyote in history. I love how the danger bridge out sign is right on the edge of the cliff there. So there are, believe it or not, some factual errors in this clip. At top speeds, coyotes are about twice as fast as roadrunners. So the image of the roadrunner kind of putting on its afterburners and outrunning the coyote is highly suspect. But Warner Brothers did get it right by portraying Wile E. Coyote chasing the roadrunner because, in fact, roadrunners are among the prey items of coyotes where the two overlap. But even though the coyote is outwitted by the bird-brained roadrunner, and I'm guessing most kids are rooting for the roadrunner, these cartoons did kind of start to humanize coyotes, and people could start feeling a small bit of empathy for the coyote. By the 1970s, public pressure to stop the inhumane and indiscriminate practice of poisoning animals through strychnine-laced carcasses caused the Nixon administration to ban the practice, but they didn't ban the killings, and the federal government just switched the method of slaughter to aerial gunning from small planes and helicopters. Despite the relatively slow change of public opinion in a positive direction caused by the media, a Yale University public perception poll showed that the coyote ranked dead last behind rattlesnakes, skunks, vultures, rats, and even cockroaches. That is rough. So I don't know, maybe this should be a preview of the next 5 talks. But the coyotes didn't seem to care much, and they continue to expand. And now any one of us alive today is witnessing the coyote move into a final frontier, or what the writer Dan Flores calls a new refuge, chock full of food and cover where no one ever shoots at you, and we are talking about cities. Starting in the Southwest, in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, the highly adaptable coyote started showing up in urbanized areas, particularly as leash laws were going into place for pet dogs. In 1999, a coyote named Otis showed up in New York, capturing the attention of the city. He was eventually captured and put in a zoo in Queens, but Otis was the first coyote sighting in New York in over 50 years. And today there's even a statue commemorating Otis in the Bronx. A few years later, Otis was followed by Howl, and then I think they stopped naming them, but the coyote sightings started to become more regular. In 2010, a coyote eluded capture for 2 months in Central Park. In 2015, a coyote made an appearance in a rooftop bar in Queens, famously escaping later through a broken window. In 2007, over in Chicago, a coyote invited itself into a Quiznos during an oppressive heat wave and made itself comfortable by the freezer. In 2009 in LA, a coyote helped itself to Jessica Simpson's dog and eluded capture despite a reward from the actress. And finally in 2012, in California, a woman thought she had hit a coyote on the freeway and continued to drive at highway speeds for almost 30 miles before someone flagged her down to tell her she had a coyote in the grill of her car that fortunately only had minor injuries and was able to be released. Today, every major American city has a coyote management study underway. In big cities where they aren't trapped, poisoned, or shot, life expectancy shoots up amazingly from they live to be about 2.5 years in rural America, but in cities, the average life expectancy shoots up to 13 years. So there's plenty of rodents and other food to eat, as you can see here. And today, as we speak, there's still 500,000 coyotes being killed annually by humans, or about 1 per minute. But despite our best efforts, we have still failed to eradicate it over this 150-year campaign. Last week, I was fortunate to come across the excellent book Mozart's Starling for the Starling Talk. And this week, I was fortunate to come across this book, Coyote America, A Natural and Supernatural History by Dan Flores. I quoted a couple times in this talk. I did a lot of skimming, and I look forward to reading the entire book because it's really well written and it's super interesting. Dan refers to the Howl of the Coyote as America's original national anthem. He describes the coyote as totemic, an avatar of humanity. And I'll let him quickly explain his work with Project Coyote, based in San Francisco. It's according to National Geographic, it encourages us to understand how we can coexist with coyotes and not react to fear or stereotypes like they don't carry rabies. And I have to plug my computer in. Sorry about this. Second. So here's just a quick video on Project Coyote from Dan Flores, the author.
Ooh, I have another good question.
What's the other good question?
Is there much coyote activity in Milwaukee?
The answer is yes.
When I wrote Coyote America, I didn't really set out to write an advocacy book. I was trying to write the story of this animal and sort of let all the chips fall where they would. But you kind of can't help drawing some conclusions about the story and about the trajectory of it into the future by doing this kind of study. Truth is, in the last 150 years or so, the United States engaged in the largest mass destruction of wildlife discoverable anywhere in world history. And so, in order to finally get to a point where we begin to understand our past and reach a compassion for these creatures, it seems to me the coyote is an entree into that, because this is the animal that we're all getting to interact with. This coyote story not only has a history that extends back into the depths of North America, but it also has a trajectory in the present and going into the future. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is to learn to coexist with coyotes. Resistance basically is futile because they're among us, they're not going away. All of our efforts to try to eradicate them or control their numbers have backfired, and they'll continue to do that. And so I think what we have to do is to follow the lead of organizations like Project Coyote in resisting the cruel ways in which these animals are being killed and persecuted, but also learning how to coexist with them in our daily lives, because that's happening. And the coyotes already know how to do it. We're the ones who are going to have to figure it out. When the book was done and it came to the attention of Camilla Fox and Project Coyote, I thought, and Camilla, I assume, thought, I believe she did, that I was probably a logical person to bring into the fold of the organization. And so she asked me if I would be a Coyote Ambassador for Project Coyote, and I was altogether too happy to do that. When people ask me that question, what can I do to help? And I will say that they very frequently ask me that question. They tell me their coyote stories, and a remarkable number of people will say, please sign my book as another coyote advocate or another coyote aficionado. But plenty of people also want to take a step beyond that, and they want to know what they can do. I mean, the first thing I tell them is to get in touch with Project Coyote, to go to the website, read carefully what's there, and realize there is an organization out there that helps not only in trying to curb the excesses of persecution that we're raining down on these animals still today, but also provides instruction in how to coexist with them.
But at the end of the day, for me, it's just easy to see why people in North America saw the coyote over all of the other wildlife that surrounded them as a reflection of the fables, the successes, and the wonder they saw in themselves. Cancel this before I get another video. And in humanity, really. So